esteemed dignitaries of the African Union, ladies and gentlemen, and the press media here today. As the ambassador of the Human Rights Commission of the People's Republic of Madagascar, it is my pleasure to welcome you here today to our very first meeting of the year 2023, in the year of our Lord. As Chairman Human Rights Commission of Madagascar, I'm here to report on the current human rights situation in the country, specifically Madagascar. So, historically, our continent has been marred by both internal, founded and unfounded, exaggerated and accurate reports on human rights abuses, misconduct, misimplementation, misinterpretation, and often misexecution, misprotection, or outright lack thereof. So, I'm not going to waste anyone's time here by re-echoing already outdated propaganda and rhetoric. I'm going to be speaking facts. It is well known that Madagascar, well, not all countries in Africa are the most peaceful, and we often have to deal with civil unrest, civil misconduct, civil disobedience. And particularly in question, as the press have made it no easy of a matter, we have heard all reports on the current special military operation on the eastern banks of Madagascar's shores. Given that this is a highly sensitive military data, I am not at privilege to share with you all top secret details. I'll only share with you what has been cleared at the highest levels and have been checked and sieved to make sure that they do not pose a threat to the national security. Contrary to popular belief, human rights commissions are institutions, not people. Whereas in an ideal world, we will be there to protect the rights of the individual, and we would love to do that. But unfortunately, especially in states of emergency, our first allegiance is to the state, and we're all subject to the governments that govern us. Are we not? Is that not a democracy after all? And were we to secede, we'll only be adding more fuel to the fire, not helping the situation. So what best do we do? Well, there's nothing specific we can do. No one wrote a manual on this. We do what we can. It's in the discretion of people like me, people like us, people who care about human rights. And at the same time, fortunately or unfortunately, do not have the luxury or leeway that freelance activists often have, and callously abuse, albeit out of ignorance, arrogance, also some deluded sense of self-righteousness and slanderous virtue signaling they continue to pursue here and there. Yes, I'm calling you out. And no doubt that actually affects the human rights situation, which prevents us from reporting accurately, because every time you come with unwarranted grievances, unwarranted questions, and often insidious insinuations, and the fact that you generalize it to the entire African continent needs to be revised. Your methods need to be revised. So, what do we go for here? I'm not at liberty to talk about the people involved in this because, again, I'm military secretary, but what has been cleared is as follows. This has been a standard military operation. There were no civilians harmed in the course of this operation. This operation was directed at the disobedient, rebellious element in the country that seek to undermine the powers of democracy, liberty, fraternity, and peaceful discourse within the country, and at large can spread throughout the continent, as my comrades in Sudan can attest to. You can imagine. I can only imagine what the international press is making out of this. Well, that's the basic situation. So what do we suggest moving forward? What we suggest moving forward is to collaborate with the state, and I urge each and every Human Rights Commission here present not to sacrifice their national obligations in favor of some moral higher calling, in quotes. Because you may not be able to tell what sort of damage that may cause in the long run to the current state of things. However well intended our actions may be, they can be detrimental in the long run and short run. And what truly makes it terrible is that we cannot track the damage, we cannot control the damage, and we cannot hope to contain that damage because, well, we'd have to agree, and we all know that in modern democracy, coming to an agreement is nearly a fantasy at this point, save a few instances, right? So that's not only limited to the field of politics, it also stretches into human rights, which are modern ideals, the same basic ideals that govern modern politics, modern ideas of democracy, 21st century democracy at that. So that's where we're at. It's a dilemma. So I know I was supposed to talk about the human rights situation in Madagascar, but quite actually I am indirectly trying to direct the members' present's attention towards the systemic structure of the institutions we have in place with regards to how best to address human rights, particularly in situations of emergency. And the question in Madagascar is evident. We've been able to address it on a national front. The human rights front will come thereafter, post haste. We all know how things are. But in extreme cases such as that of Sudan, instead of rendering human rights commissions and institutions absolutely defunct as during times of conflict, and have to rely on freelance media, foreign media, national media, who actually hardly ever take responsibility for their part of the damage, albeit arguably a small portion of the damage in most cases, historical cases. So we want to make things as fair as possible, and that requires some introspective analysis into our systems, into our structures. We need to put aside our political divisions. I know my fellow member there, the council from West Africa, is literally thinking about how we as the African Union cannot come up with $85 million in aid to help Somalia, and they have to rely on foreign aid, not to mention the double paradox of the question of Somaliland, the people who want to secede from the rest of Somalia, and the fact that the United Nations doesn't recognize them as a country. So any aid that needs to get to the people of Somaliland has to go through the embassy of Somalia, and more often than not stays in Somalia, which is another question of human rights. Thank God that's not a problem for us in Madagascar. I know, I'm starting to sound like one of those foreign media journalists and critics and analysts on Al Jazeera, BBC, CNN, or our ex-colonial benefactors, the West, so to speak. But we've got to speak frankly and bluntly. I mean, worst case scenario, I get labeled in the media that I completely overlooked Human Rights Commission, overstepped my boundaries, and began talking politics, like in a political rant. But that's what it is, and keenly enough, whether or not I talk about human rights, it's always going to be politicized. So I'm just, how can I say this? I'm just skipping over how do you call them, these things in the media, skipping over the commercial that is human rights, and move straight towards the politics, which basically decides what is a human right and what is not. Well, if not said, it is shown. Well, I'm not saying it's a problem in Madagascar, and given that it's a matter of national security, I can't give you all the details on it, so... And the duty of a Human Rights Commission is to our country first, and we do not have the luxury of others to avoid taking responsibility for any unwarranted damage we might do in living up to your expectations, in reporting on, in giving the report you want to hear, in saying what you want to hear. And by you, I mean our folks in the international media who don't really have a real stake in all of this. So, yeah, that has been my rant. I yield the floor.